when it comes to podcasts, I've just been a big podcast fan long before I started one. So any of my interests, like music or movies or video games or books or UFC or poker, any of those things, I would listen to podcasts on those topics. To me, it's almost like a university on the go, where while I'm doing other things, I'm learning, and there's an education going on there, which is great. I just loved podcasts, but I didn't consider starting one. And then right at the start of the pandemic, a friend of mine started her own podcast, kind of a personal growth one. And she
Mhm.
reached out to me and said, "Hey, I started this podcast." It was super easy. There's software now and technology that makes it very easy to start, and surprisingly easy to get it on Apple and Spotify and YouTube. She goes, "You should check it out." So she actually planted the seed. And then I thought, okay, well, if she can do it, I should be able to figure it out. I'm a pretty technical guy with my background. So that planted the seed. And you mentioned that at the start of your podcast, not a lot of people are paying attention. We think
Oh,
we're
wait.
just going to hit
It's
record.
yelling into a well, yelling out of a well. That's the best analogy I heard, and that was it. That explains it perfectly.
We think we are going to hit record and the world is just going to come to us. And what's actually crazy is the stat is, I think it's 90% of podcasts don't get past the third episode,
Yep.
because it takes hours and hours and hours of either prep or actually recording or editing or promotion to do one episode. And after 3 episodes, most people see the amount of work and how little anybody cares or is paying attention,
Mhm.
and they're gone. So knowing those numbers, 4.5 years ago, for the first 2 years of the podcast, nobody cared at
Mhm.
all.
Yep.
Nobody was listening, like not my family, not my friends, nobody. And I didn't even have a vision. I just started interviewing people I thought were awesome
Mhm.
and that they had something that was worth learning, and they had a story that was worth sharing. So
Mhm.
they weren't even 2-hour deep dive interviews. They were probably 30 to 60 minutes.
Yep.
And, so it was like an author, a NHL player, inspirational speaker, a dancer, those kind of things. And I'd have a few musicians here and there. And then I just stayed consistent they say, you want to do something that you love so that you'd be doing it even if you weren't getting paid for it. Well, I wasn't getting paid for it. So, you make sure you love it. So I stayed consistent for 2 years. And at the 2-year mark, I asked Chuck Daly, the bass player for I Mother Earth, as well as the Salads. I reached out and just shared a story that, hey, when I was like 14, I waited at a future shop in a lineup to get your autograph. And I ran into you guys in Montreal when I was there. I'm from Ottawa. And when I was in Montreal for a Radiohead concert, I ran into you guys, and I guess they were playing the same night. And I just had all these stories. And I said, hey, this is a total Hail Mary, but I have a
Yep.
podcast. Would you like to be a guest? And I guess I buttered them up enough with my stories and showing how much a fan I was, that he said yes. So out of nowhere, after 2 years of 2 years of nobody caring, I
Yep.
got this guest that was multi-platinum. And then I released that episode and I share it with his mutual friends on Facebook. So
Mhm.
if there were musicians I knew that I thought might like that interview, seeing their friend get interviewed, I sent it to them. So I ended up sending it to Rick Jacket from Finger 11, another multi-platinum band. And he said, hey man, it's the pandemic. We're in the middle of lockdowns. Finger 11 has nothing happening
Mhm.
right now.
Yeah.
It's brutal. He goes, I would love to do a 2-hour deep dive interview with you. And I think the Chuck one was one of the first 2-hour ones because there was
Yeah.
so much to say. So after 2 years, then I get a multi-platinum guest that leads to another multi-platinum guest. And then since having I Mother Earth and Finger 11, almost every guest since then over the last 2.5 years have been gold, platinum, or multi-platinum. That's all
Wow.
it took, was 2 guests. And then every band I asked after that would look at those 2 bands and
Mhm.
say, well, those bands are bigger than we
Yep.
are. If
Yeah.
they think this is a good idea, we should probably do it. So right after I Mother Earth and Finger 11, then there was Winter Sleep and the Mudmen, and who do I have back here? Yeah, right away, Moist and Blue Rodeo and Big Wreck, Big Sugar, the Arkells, and I've never looked back. So I guess if you get anything out of this interview, it's you just have to stick around long enough to still be there when the success would happen, and that's what I did. And we're now 4.5 years in, and things are good.